looking at another common mistake that students make for the topic of area. And this question here appeared in the PSLE paper in 2019, and we'll be looking at part B of this question, which is a common mistake that some students will make. Now let's take a look at this question first. Part B wants you to find the number of squares that CT cut out. Now you may think to solve for this, to solve for the number of squares, you will first have to find the area of one square, which is 5 to multiply by 5, since we know that the side of each square is 5 cm, so you get 25. And then second step, you will proceed to find the area of the total rectangular piece of paper, which is 35 multiplied by 24.6, and that gives you 861. And then afterwards, you can find the number of squares by using 861 to divide by 25, and that gives you 34.44, and so your maximum number of squares is 34. And if you are going to do this in the exam, you're going to get the wrong answer. Okay, this is not the correct way to solve this, because to explain this question better, I'm going to draw out the rectangular piece of paper so that you can visualize it better. So the length is 35 cm by 24.6 cm. And then CT wants to cut as many 5 cm squares as possible from the paper. So this is an example of a 5 cm square, and she's going to cut as many as she can for the length. So if you want to find out what's the maximum number of squares that she can cut from the length, you can use 35 to divide by 5, and that gives you a maximum of 7. And then if we want to do the same for the breadth, and we know that since this is also a square, and the breadth will be 5 cm too. So we want to find out how many 5 cm squares she can cut out for the breadth of 24.6. We can use 24.6 to divide by 5, and that gives you a maximum of 4. Okay, so if we were to visualize this, let me draw it out. That's 4, 5, 6, 7. So 7 squares for the length, and then for the breadth, she's able to cut out a maximum of 4. So this is how the diagram looks like when you cut out the squares. Those on top, which I'm going to highlight in green, these are the squares that CT has managed to cut out. So since we can see it is 4 groups of 7, so we can find out the total number of squares by using 4 to multiply by 7, which gives us an answer of 28. So 28 is the correct answer. Now, so back to the first method that we have done just now. Why is it that the first method gave us a different answer, an answer that is more than the actual answer? Now, because if you are doing by method 1, okay, let me bring your attention to this small little thing at the bottom. This is the remainder when you cut all the squares out, because you know that since we only can cut out 4 of the 5 cm squares, so we only used 20 cm over here. So this part over here is 20 centimeters. Now, since the entire breadth is 24.6 centimeters, there is a small remainder of 4.6 centimeters at the bottom. So I'm going to highlight the remainder at the bottom in orange. And when you use method number 1, you are actually using bits and pieces of the remainder, the one that I've highlighted or colored in orange, to form 5 cm by 5 cm squares. So that's the reason why when you use method 1, you are able to get more squares. But we don't want to get squares, 5 cm squares that are formed by bits and pieces of the remainder. So that's why we can't do it by method 1. So the correct way to solve for such questions is to find out the maximum you can get from the length and then from the breadth. And if you're given a 3D diagram, you can also find the same thing for the height. So please make sure that in the exam, if you encounter questions like this, do not use the area of the total area to divide by the area of one square to find the number of squares that CT can cut out.